Welcome to the eye test. There will be 40 players that I examined. Only 30 players are drafted. Here are the participants. Stay tuned to see who will go undrafted.
Welcome to the eye test, everybody. Before we get into it, when you watch games, you may see a player drop 30 points, maybe 40 points. Maybe two players average the same thing for the most part. What's the difference? Well, when you watch them, one of them may have a more appealing game, one of them may have a more winning style of basketball. And so you may have some questions. What is the eye test? How did I grade these things? What are the scores if it's an eye test? And so let's break that down. How many shots did they miss? Well, you could see that on the field goal chart. But what type of shots did they miss? Were they open shots? Were they contested shots? Were they forced shots? These are things that matter. When you pass the ball to somebody, was it that they were open? Was it to create space for yourself? Do you just not have it in you to score the ball at that moment? These are different things that only the eyes can analyze and tell. You won't get this from numbers. The 90s is a lot more physical than the game today, and the 80s are more physical than the 90s. How do you distinguish their stats? How can you look past the stats to figure out who's the better player with different things like stacked teams or the physicality hindering a lot of performances? The eye. Kevin Durant's foot on the line. In my personal opinion, I kind of treat it as if he made it to some degree. Now, was his foot on the line? Yes. It was barely on the line? Yes. So I know, okay, have he been a couple centimeters off, would he have missed that shot? No. It just so happened to be so. They so happened to lose that series. He can't accumulate other benefits that come along with his toe not being on the line. But in my opinion, I don't look at it as him missing the shot or him failing his team. Some debates are so close, they just have to be judged by the eyes. Let me ask you a question. Who's better, Kevin Garnett or Dirk Nowitzki? Dirk led his team to a championship, but you could say Garnett never had the team that Dirk had. Garnett, though not as good as an offensive player, reached pretty high in '04 and was always a great defensive player. Who's the better player? Well, that's something the eyes would have to tell you. My last example is this. A lot of idiots out there think or claim that LeBron's still as good as he used to be. But if they were to just use their eyes, and when I ask them, is he as fast as he used to be? Does he jump as high as he used to be? Does he win it like he used to be? The answer is no. You can read numbers on a sheet and say 27, 7, and 7, same guy. But when you see him get blocked by an Alex Caruso or something to that extent, or you see him miss layups that he should have made, or slower to get to the basket, or don't drive as much to the basket, the eye tell you there, man's getting old. Quick rules. Every player got at least 45 to an hour plus of highlights being watched. Every player has 7 games under their belt. What I did was, out of 101 being the greatest player I've ever seen, 100 being basically a perfect game, a 97 being, or 98 being clearly the best player in the league, 97 being arguably one of the best players in the league. 86 being not that impressive. 89 being second player minimum on a championship team. As in, like, when you think of a Robin. Now, what I did with those scores is tallied them up. Found the mean, the median, and the mode. And if you aren't too familiar with that, here you go.
But it's up to you to figure out which one's the most appropriate tool. Well, most people are going to jump right away and calculate the mean or the average for the data. But hold on a second. Is that always the best way to go, using the mean? Let's have a look at an example. Here we've got a graph of some student marks. Let's just say this was the graph showing a very small math class. How many students are in the math class? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 students. Pretty small. And how are they doing overall? What's the general sense of the class? Well, I'd probably say they're having a pretty tough time in this class. If you look at most of the marks, you have 32, 35, 30, 39, 37, 31. But somebody is having a fantastic time in the class. They have a mark of 99. This guy that's way far away from the other dots is what's called an outlier. And outliers are data points that really don't fit in with the rest of the pack. But let's see how this changes the mean. If you remember, to calculate the mean, we just add up all the values that we see there and then divide by the number of values there are. So I'm just going to start adding up all of these numbers. And then we get to the student that's having a fantastic time in the class. I wish I had 99s when I was taking math. And we'll divide all of those by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, again, 7 students. And I'll skip the calculator work, but I'll show you that the mean, or the class average, turns out to be about 43. And while that's still not great, 43 really doesn't seem to represent how the class was really doing, because when you look here, most of the students are all down in the 30s. In fact, the low 30s in some cases. But this outlier, the very high 99, pulled the mean up higher. So the class mean is 43. So, in this case, when we have an outlier, the mean is not the best way to go. How about the median? You remember the median's the middle value. To find the median, I'm just going to start rearranging all the marks from lowest to highest. Just like this. Then we have 37, 39, and finally 99. So now what's the middle value? What's the median? Well, it looks like it's 35 because I have 3 numbers to the left and 3 numbers to the right of 35. So that's the median. 35 is a much more accurate representation of how that class was doing overall. So remember, when you have an outlier, chances are the median is the more accurate way to go. But what about the mode? Well, let's have another example. Here we've got a Canadian survey. And this survey just asked random teenagers, how do you feel about this statement? You have a lot of friends. Is that completely false, that you have no friends? A little bit false? You have maybe 1 or 2. Sometimes false? Mostly true? Or is it completely true that yes, you do have a lot of friends? So could we use the mean or median for this case? Well, not really, because the answers aren't numbers like we have here on this graph where we're talking about marks. We're talking about a survey question. So really the only calculation we can do, or really the only analyzing we could do, is to use the mode, because it looks at what's the most common answer for a survey. So for this survey, what is the mode? In other words, what's the most common answer? Well, on a histogram or bar graph like we have here, it's easy. It's just the tallest bar.
I decided they all mattered, so I included them all. I didn't just leave the mean. But since there's a hierarchy, and since the mode mostly is due to their highlight scores, I have it less on the chain than the other two. And so, why did I use numbers? I use numbers because some things are going to get really tricky, really hard. And honestly, I'd like more games under my belt before I make the official claim. So, that video will come soon, as this is only part 1. And later on in the line, at the end of it all, I'll have my official eye test draft, where I tell you, no numbers, no nothing, my pure, honest opinion, who's a better basketball player, watching my eyes. But that doesn't mean it won't be done in this video, as if something sticks out, or I just have my opinion to be said, I'll have it be heard. There are a couple things during this draft here that I really did like. Some things threw me off, and some things I'll basically address. And so, just because this is Juba Jordan, and that would hurt LeBron to some degree if I said, Kobe's better than LeBron. I'm not gonna do that, and I'm not gonna say LeBron's better than Kobe just because I personally am more inclined to his stats. That's not what I'm gonna do. When the time is right and I have the decision made, I'll let it be known who's better between the two. I'll let it be known who's better between a Magic or a Larry, or any of the tough battles that people have in debates. If it's something that's I'm not too sure on, I'll have it be quiet. And it's impossible to agree with everything that I have in this video, but none of this was cap. This is all how I feel. Welcome to the eye draft, everybody. Now on to the draft.
The most important position in the NBA is the center position. Why is it so important? Because when the center is not scoring, they have to stop the other team from scoring, especially in the paint. And inside defense is just more important than perimeter defense. When you include rebounding the ball as well, there's a lot of stuff that the center has to do. These aren't my reasons why he's my first pick, but these are the reasons why he became the first pick. This player can not only score for his team, but he can defend like no other. Arguably the greatest offensive center and unarguably the greatest defensive center. With the first pick in the NBA draft, I pick Hakeem Olajuwon. Why did I go with Hakeem Olajuwon? How did he rank so high? Again, not only did he have to shoulder the offense for his team night in and night out, he also shouldered the defense and made defense a highlight of his game, stopping teams at all levels. In only one game was there a player to even come close to playing as good as him. That was Shaquille O'Neal. With the first pick in the NBA draft, Hakeem Olajuwon. Like I stated earlier, this is a rare thing and only one other player has a claim to this. Olajuwon was never outplayed, always shouldered the offensive load, and was the best defensive player every single night. The thing about Hakeem Olajuwon was his offensive game was great, but his defensive game was arguably greater. And when you can stop another team from scoring, as well as score the ball, there's not that much more you can ask from. With an S+ level in post moves, S+ level in defense, a willing passer, he had to be drafted at number 1. But what were some of his weaknesses? As I will talk about everybody's weaknesses tonight. Some of his weaknesses were his hands. He had a lack of hands and felt like he could have caught better balls. Pause. 2. His athletic length. How long he was in his athletic prime is what I'm getting at here. He was an athletic freak and a gift. But during the 95-96, when he actually won, he was nowhere as near as athletic as he used to be. And if he could have meshed both of those together, he could have been the real GOAT. What are some other things? Other than that, maybe stretching the floor. I think he was a pretty decent floor stretcher, but say he stretched the floor a little bit better for today's game. Those would be the main things. Though there are more games to be watched in the future, out of these 7 games, he reigned supreme at number 1. The best player I watched, Michael Jordan. What were some things about Michael Jordan that stood out to me? Well, every time he played, you were in for a show. Not only was he a great offensive player, but a great defensive player. I'd say the greatest offensive player of all time, and one of the greatest perimeter defensive players of all time, if not the greatest perimeter defensive player of all time. Some things about Mike. Mid-range game, arguably the greatest of all time. His ability to drive to the basket, the greatest of all time. In terms of tiers, a B-plus level 3-point shooter, a willing passer, an underrated passer, can play the point guard and the shooting guard, as well as the small forward. Though a lesser degree to the other two, there's truly none like him. When you include his skills, his mindset, and athleticism, I myself was shocked he wasn't number 1. Like Olajuwon, shouldered the offensive load. Didn't have to shoulder the defensive load as much. But just like Olajuwon, again, no player outplayed him. For Mike's sake at least, there was a player who you could argue outplayed him. That was Charles Barkley. Setting the stage. I was looking for a Charles Barkley game. I found a game that said, or that was listed or titled, Charles Barkley destroys Michael Jordan and the Bulls. I clicked on it. Michael Jordan had a very slow start, and Charles Barkley was doing his thing exactly as the title suggested. But towards the end of the game, everything changed. And it was another moment I realized,
that's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Why didn't the GOAT get drafted number 1? Well, with the shooting guard in any other position that's not necessarily the center, perimeter defense can only do you so much. You passing to the only man can only do so much. With Olajuwon, when he had bad games, his great defense allowed him to always be a factor. That's why he was number 1. Lastly, some things he could have changed to help out his game would be more 3-point shooting. He didn't need flashier passing, but that's something that obviously would have brought him up a tick. If you could pick the body of an NBA player, not a center, who would it be other than LeBron James? Highlights being a great driver, one of the greatest. A great playmaker, one of the greatest. With one of the greatest athletic builds in the history of sports. Super strong, super fast, at 6'8", with great IQ, and sometimes a great defender. Very versatile, in fact. What held him back from being drafted at a higher spot? Well, a lot of the times himself. Knocks on his game would be settling for jumpers, not going to the post as much as he should, showing up in some, disappearing in other games. Unlike both Hakeem and Mike, some players that outplayed LeBron were Rajon Rondo Kawhi Leonard, KD, Anthony Edwards, Kyrie, Wade, arguably Steph Curry. All of those players I witnessed outshine LeBron in the 7-game stretch. Before I move on from LeBron, one thing that stood out to me was, the next pick has one thing in common with him. On the offensive end, there were offensive fouls that did not get called on them when they should, and defensive fouls that should. Many times I thought, hey, they actually got fouled and it wasn't called. But then again, a lot of times on the offensive end, they got away with offensive fouls. Who is this player that was so close to LeBron that actually tied with LeBron in multiple scenarios? Shaquille O'Neal. With Shaq actually having a higher mean average than LeBron, but the other things tanked him down to the 4 spot. What were some things about Shaq? Well, dominant. That's what Shaq is. S plus in the paint. Great. When you have the ball inside the paint, inside the circle, probably not a better option. An A-level defender, maybe even better. His knock on defense would be switching, but as far as deterring people from getting to the basket is almost unmatched. He can block you as well as hurt you physically. What held Shaq back? Well, he couldn't make free throws to end the games. He couldn't end games because of that, and he couldn't shoot the ball. Sometimes in some of those games, he looked like a big muscle head, and that's why he couldn't be any higher than where he is now. Watching Shaq lose to Tim Duncan and the Spurs while having Kobe Bryant on his team really hurt him. Now this person didn't beat them in a series, but he beat them in a couple good games and gave them a good run. This player is Kevin Garnett. A big ticket. What stood out about Kevin Garnett? Well, he is the most similar player to the first pick in this draft, which is Olajuwon. When playing with the Wolves, especially in 04, the offense and the defense relied upon Kevin Garnett, and he gave it 100% on offense and defense. He'd have the post move every now and then, fast, athletic, could stretch the floor, but again, really aggressive on defense, and which is why someone like Embiid can't be the closest player to Olajuwon. With an excellent mid-range game, can handle the ball, knows when to pass the ball, move, just lacked consistent offense. Wish he was a little bit bigger, but that is the big ticket for you. The only 70s player that got my full attention, that was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I wasn't really sure if Garnett was better than Shaq, so Garnett being under Shaq is perfectly fine. And if I had to pick between LeBron and Shaq, that'd be tough. I think I favor LeBron for the simple fact he can make free throws. But those are extremely tough, and I'm not that sure. But I'm pretty sure, more than the rest of those, I would take Kareem over Shaquille O'Neal. He was really good. He had a consistent hook shot. He could make the mid-range shot. A good defender. The rules really were hard to find out how good of a player he was. When you looked at the rules and the competition at the center position compared to the 90s centers, they didn't really compare. Tying for the 3rd highest average. Always impressive, never special. Did I mention a great defensive player? Comment T-Mac if this ended up being the most surprising one out of the whole draft. Great score.
And a willing defender. This is based off numbers and the game scores, like I stated earlier. But I also said I'd keep it real. The same way I thought, and I said Michael Jordan was the best player.
McGrady put on a show. Not only was he one of the greatest offensive players I've ever seen, a willing defender, a crispy passer, S tier in the scoring. S tier. Really good handle, could shoot the three, shoot the mid-range, could drive, lay a package. The only thing he really slacked was some games he could have been a little bit better, especially in the bigger games. And his defense could always have improved. Like Kobe Bryant said, Grady is a 6'10" Kobe Bryant. Though it isn't actually true, it's pretty close. At the height of 6'10", though not fast, one of the greatest playmakers of all time, an elite offensive talent, elite scoring talent, an underrated defender, Larry Bird. The Warriors decided to keep that team first and three-point shooting identity. One of, if not the clutchest players of all time. Smart, savvy, knows how to score without the ball. One thing about Bird, he didn't need to touch the ball a lot to make things work. Last thing before I get off of Bird, I think he actually might be better than Magic. 7 games did show me something there. Oh, well, you know, Larry Bird, he's not that fast. He can't really score. There's athletic defenders guarding him. Well, the next pick in the draft goes to Luka Doncic. The Lakers are going with a different type of magic, Luka magic. Can handle the ball, can play make the ball. Great passer, great shooter, can score all levels. Extremely clutch, probably the clutchest player in the league right now. Only thing about him, he has a lot of ball time. He's a trash defender, which does separate him from the person ahead of him.
I hear Larry Bird.
Actually interested in your opinion. Who's better between the two players? Luka Doncic or former MVP, former champion, the Slim Reaper, Kevin Durant? As far as both in their primes, it is really a close battle. What are some things that led to Kevin Durant being where he is now? Again, guys, this is not based off the court things. So him leaving OKC for a better team, or him even losing that OKC game or series, doesn't hurt him like as a whole. Maybe a game in that I watched. But what were some things about KD that really stood out? 2018 KD gets compared to quote-unquote prime 2018 LeBron. What were some things about KD that were really impressive? Well, a 7-footer with handles like a guard, mobility like a guard, can shoot over any defender, one of the greatest mid-range shooters, probably the second greatest mid-range shooter of all time, one of, if not the most, team-friendly offensive talent, meaning you can plug him to any team and he makes them better. He doesn't disturb what they do. But from what I've seen here, clearly under Larry Bird, especially when you include the fact Larry Bird was a more clutch player, a better defender, and when he wasn't scoring, could also pass the ball. Something KD does, but he's not Larry Bird, an all-time playmaker. I can see changing, unlike the other one I just said, but these two players I also feel like are probably a tad a bit above Durant as far as when I just watched them play. Who are these two players? Well, and why am I calling them these two players? This was the first actual tie in the draft. No matter how I sliced it, everywhere I went, these guys were close. And in the final doing, these guys tied again. Who are these guys? One of them, just like KD. Another, the opposite of KD, but just like KD's rival. I'm rambling. Why am I rambling? This is live footage of me deciding who should I pick in real time between the two. 'Cause like again, I said it was a tie. And when ties are made, I had to make the decision who I felt was better between the two personally. And it was real tough. I'll tell you now, I have second thoughts about it, but they were tied. and I'm gonna have second thoughts about it no matter who I picked. I'll quickly go over both of these players. Dirk Nowitzki, I thought he was better than KD straight up. It was always a debate of mine. I think I can put that to rest. Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson had better peak games than Dirk Nowitzki. Magic Johnson had games that he clipped what Dirk Nowitzki did. But Dirk Nowitzki was more consistent. A consistent bucket. Consistently reliable. And showed up in big games. Both players had the clutch gene. Both players knew when to turn it on. Both players not that good at defense. Looking back, I probably prefer Magic. Again, really tough. Only put here for the simple fact his highlights weren't too impressive, and that had to have derailed his score. Just like this next player, I would put him in that 3 to 7 range as far as overall what I saw. But when you have bad games, it cannot be denied. And if you have a boring or really not that impressive highlight reel, there's chances I missed out on some of your worst games. So that's why he is where he is. Before I tallied up their scores for the mean, median, and mode, this player, LeBron, and Tim Duncan, I knew one of them would be 3, 4, and 5. I was wrong. But what led Kobe here? I'd like to talk about that first. Like Michael and Olajuwon, it came down to when you're not scoring, what are you doing for your team? But unlike Michael and Olajuwon, I had a pretty clear answer. I thought Mike was 1, Hakeem was 2, score set different. This one here, I have to give Duncan the edge. It was much more obvious for me. Personally, Tim Duncan's biggest weakness, sometimes he didn't grab the bull by the horn enough. Sometimes he didn't lead the charge enough. Kobe Bryant, in my opinion, shot himself out of many games. I'm talking down on him now, and though he's ranked pretty low, overall, the games I watched did help. And he's one of the few players I think if I watch different games, I might have had a different result. Kobe Bryant was the last pick in the lottery. Now, who gets drafted next? None other than the greatest shooter of all time, Steph Curry. Quickly, great handles. One of the greatest handles of all time. Again, the greatest shooter of all time. Really good passer. And great, if not one of the greatest off-ball players of all time. And again, with the range to really strike fear in the opponent's heart. The knock being, the greatest shooter of all time before Steph was who? Ray Allen? Maybe Reggie Miller? Are these guys super high on the list? No. The shooting alone doesn't make you all-time great. Is his shooting far better than them? I'd say so. But what's something else? What's another reason why shooting is not that important? Because I'll agree he's a better shooter. It's being, shooters have on and off days. Sometimes your shots fall, sometimes your shots don't fall. And when your shot's not falling, what are you doing for your team? Steph Curry draws attention. He passes the ball. But that's about it. Barkley is next on my list. I was surprised to see who I have at the number 2 power forward of all time. Have 3 other power forwards ranked over him. But it is what it is. That's what I saw. Barkley was a great rebounder, could stretch the floor, could carry an offense, and I thought he had a clutch gene. Charles Barkley's weaknesses were his body. Though he was strong and it helped him get rebounds, he was small and not that much in shape, so it hurt him defensively. This is a tough battle right here. Who's better, Patrick Ewing or Charles Barkley? Both players in the 90s. Though big men, one's a power forward, one's a center. Both lost to Mike and could be champions if not for him. On the real, I probably put Patrick above Barkley, but it's extremely close, and so I'm not surprised by this at all. Some things about Ewing was a great perimeter defender, could score in the paint, could stretch the floor, was called the greatest shooting big man before Dirk. Weaknesses being not that impressive of a switch defender, and felt like he should have had a better hook to fade ratio as far as success, but there's not that much to knock as far as Patrick Ewing. Not the greatest offensive player, not the greatest defensive player, but a great player and a great center at that. My last knock on Ewing would be, out of all the big men I covered so far, he was the least willing passer. Though minus Olajuwon, the other guys definitely had better teammates. Money on him, let's go. Next pick in the draft, Derrick Rose. Clutch, super athletic, a speed demon, super explosive, decent playmaker. What held him back? Lack of shooting, not that good of a defensive player. Probably didn't even get to be in his prime, but he is where he is. If you know Juba J, you know Chris Paul being under these guys, blasphemy. But again, I'm telling you guys what I saw and how I feel. And with the 20th pick in the draft, the Hawks select D. Wade. When you ignore the faggotry, Dwayne Wade is an all-time great. Lack of shooting and lack of size is the only reason where he is where he is. He has a pretty good mid-range, but if he had an even better one or a better three-point shot, then size would be his only problem, and he'd probably be the pound-for-pound GOAT. With the 20th pick in the draft, Nikola Jokic. If you can't beat him, draft him. What were some things that really stood out about Nikola Jokic? He is in the right ballpark. I'd probably put him both over Wade and Rose. He'd be placed right where Ewing is. Somewhere with the Ewing-Barkley range. The thing about Jokic was tremendous passer, all-time great passer, greatest passing center of all time. Great stretch center. The thing about Jokic was, and he's pretty clutch, but the thing about Jokic was his negatives, competition, and his body, his frame. He can't really guard another all-time great center. You can't really trust him to. Man, switch, help, not that good. Almost awful defensively. These are current players here, so I don't gotta go too much into their positives. Giannis, freak of nature, super strong, super fast, especially for his size. Can jump out the gym, can dunk on almost anybody. What are his weaknesses though? Well, can't really shoot. Doesn't really have a go-to shot. His mid-range game, very lacking. When you're a driver, you need the mid-range shot or a go-to post move so you don't get double-teamed or at least combat the double-team, and that's something he lacks. When you put into the fact he's not that good of a free throw shooter and can be taken out of games in key moments, he's a great player, a great defensive player, and I love defense, and that's why he has to be here. But he can't go any higher than that. For the position, good handle, good playmaker. The 22nd pick goes to Dwight Howard. Now, I didn't think about this before I did this draft, before I did the numbers crunching. Giannis or Dwight, very tough. Giannis, better free throw shooter. Dwight, better paint protector, better rebound. Dwight had a decent hook. His knocks were shooting, free throw shooting, and offensive consistency. Another person in the running for the pound-for-pound GOAT, Allen Iverson, did a lot of things well. He's a volume scorer, but I didn't see a ball hogger. He played defense, or he tried to. His size hurt him. He'd be a better driver. He'd probably be a better shooter. And he'd be a better defender if he was just a little bit taller. Then again, I wish I was a baller. Last compliments: great driver, great mid-range shooter, great handle. If this were football and offense and defense were two different teams, James Harden would have definitely been higher. James Harden is an all-time offensive talent. Handles, all-time. Playmaking, great. Scoring, all-time. Ability to make contested shots, all-time. But James Harden, did he have his hiccups? Yeah, I didn't really witness too much, but I did see the hiccups. His defense was horrible. Not there at times. And so you can't be any higher, though your offense is tremendous. To a lesser degree, though not the greatest offensively, the greatest offensive rebounder of all time, Moses Malone. He wasn't super impressive as far as watching, but he did what he had to do. He got the job done in most occasions, and in some games he actually had some pretty impressive stat lines. His only weakness was mobility and shooting. And with the 26th pick in the all-time draft, I select the Klaw, Kawhi Leonard Jordan. For my money, the greatest perimeter defensive player of all time. And yes, though similar to Mike, when it comes to style of play and defense, the thing that makes him lesser than a Kobe or MJ would be 1, his athleticism, 2, his refined scoring. Kobe isn't the athlete that Mike is, and Kawhi isn't the athlete that Kobe is. Nonetheless, the Klaw is selected over many other all-time greats and deserves his ranking. Looks like the Pacers aren't going to give up on him again. I would make the argument Kawhi Leonard gets drafted over James Harden. With the next pick in the NBA draft, with the 27th pick in the eye test draft, I select David Robinson. I brought up the James Harden thing for the simple fact David, Kawhi, and James are in that ballpark. Now, David Robinson was a beast. When he wasn't choking games, he was a freak of nature, something I probably haven't seen before. He could run, he could jump, he was strong, he could shoot the ball. Of course he could dunk. He had a fade, he had a hook shot, he was a willing passer, a great defender. He, like James Harden, just have a knack for not showing up at times. He's another one I expect to make a higher jump next go round. And as we near down to the 28th pick in the eye test draft, I selected Russell Westbrook. His energy, his heart, his soul. It's a main reason, how he got drafted, where he got drafted. The thing about Russ, he's going to give you whatever he can. Downsides, defense, not that impressive, though he really does try. Shooting, not there. Good playmaking, but can be tunnel vision at times. So, before we worry about being the GOAT or the first pick, let's work on defense, shooting, and getting players involved a little bit more. The explosiveness, the effort, an historic prime and stretch of games allowed him to be amongst these great players today. And with the 29th pick in the eye test draft, I'm going to select, what time is it? Dame time. Damian Lillard. When Dame is rolling, who can stop him? In his time, he could drive, and he could shoot from the logo. Simply put it, he's an all-time scorer. Why is he so low? Defense, playmaking, That's good news because with the 30th pick and final pick in the eye test draft, I select Anthony Davis. Yeah, Anthony Davis, you were there for a long time, my guy, and you finally got picked. I know. I'm sorry. But nah, the thing about Anthony Davis is a great switch defender, a great stretch player, especially as a big. Is a 4, but can play the 5. Decent handle for a big. Anthony Davis's only weakness is mentality. Defense, all-time level. And honestly, he can score at an all-time level if he put his mind to it. Final thoughts and conclusions. It pretty much came out to how I thought it would be for the most part. Now, obviously, there were some big upsets and some big things I didn't think would happen, like McGrady being at number 6, Kobe being all the way down there, and that's why I'm here now. I'm going to talk about some things I would have changed and things I think will be likely for the future. Now, Olajuwon and Jordan are going to have a tough battle the next go around. And I figured I wanted to do it before, but got to the games and finished them out before I knew it. So the next time we do this, Olajuwon and Jordan will go against each other 3 out of the 7 times I watched them play. Nextly, without Kobe Bryant being so low was another shocker. But again, like I said in the video, Kobe Bryant really grew in my rankings. And before, I didn't think he would be amongst the players I have him with now. But now he's going to be amongst players like LeBron, Kareem, Shaq, Tim Duncan, Larry Bird. And probably over players like Magic Johnson. Though Magic Johnson was drafted over Kobe Bryant, I'll be interested to see if Magic Johnson keeps that spot over Kobe Bryant. Another thing I'd like to talk about, some more things. I used to think, or used to place Magic over Kareem. Another thing that'll have to be examined. My man Chris Paul, Isaiah Thomas, didn't get drafted. That really did hurt. And I really do think they'll be drafted next time around. We'll see how they place in the second round, and we'll go from there. This is how the draft would have been with only using the mean or average score totals. Hakeem Olajuwon, Michael Jordan, Kevin Garnett, and Kareem tied, but Garnett, then Kareem. Shaq, LeBron, Tracy McGrady, Larry Bird, Tim Duncan,
Magic Johnson. Luka, Dirk, KD, Steph. And this one here, KD beat Steph by 0.1. KD also beat Steph in the draft, too. Barkley, Ewing, Kobe, Derrick Rose, Wade, Joker, Allen Iverson, Giannis, Moses, Kawhi Leonard, Dwight Howard, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Vince. I think if I haven't already named 30 players, David Robinson. That would have been the draft without including the mean and mode. Will Olajuwon keep his number one spot? Will Kareem or Garnett be placed over LeBron? Where will Kobe rank? Will Chris Paul ever get drafted? Stay tuned.
Next time on Dragon Ball Z.
I'll be saying bump the ratings and draft everybody else on this screen as I see fit. Via the eye test, of course.